Nvidia's RTX 5070 Ti desktop card and 5070 Ti laptop GPU share the same name, but the performance is completely different. I've compared both in 25 games at 3 resolutions, as well as power draw, thermals, fan noise, and more to show you all the differences. For starters, the laptop version is using a smaller die that's closer to the 5070 desktop GPU, so the desktop version of the 5070 Ti ends up with 52% more CUDA, Tensor, and RT cores compared to the laptop, a massive difference for 2 parts with the same name. The desktop version has 33% more VRAM capacity, along with a bigger memory bus and more memory bandwidth. But perhaps most importantly, the desktop card can run up to 300 watts, while the laptop version maxes out at just 140 watts, so it gets less than half the amount of power. Of course, less power is always going to be expected with laptop hardware, there's just less space for cooling. But still, those are some pretty big differences from 2 products that are named 5070 Ti, and that definitely could be misleading to people that don't otherwise know the difference. Nvidia does include the laptop GPU text on the end of the laptop 5070 Ti, but I don't think that's quite as obvious as back in the day when they used to put the letter M on the end to signify that it was a mobile part, like AMD still does. I'm using XMG's Neo 16 laptop for this testing, as it's the most powerful gaming laptop with an RTX 5070 Ti laptop GPU I've come across so far. This thing has support for liquid cooling, which would further boost FPS, but I've tested it on air cooling to better represent a more typical 5070 Ti laptop. Gaming laptops with these specs aren't quite as expensive as the 5080 and 5090 versions, but they're still far from cheap. So if we find any good sales, we'll add them to the gaminglaptop.deals website. Check it out and save money on your next gaming laptop with that link below. My test PC for the desktop 5070 Ti card has received a huge upgrade this year thanks to MSI. From the motherboard, power supply, SSD, case, and cooler, MSI pretty much does it all now. You can find links to all the parts in the description. There are always going to be differences between laptop and desktop hardware. That's just the way it is. But I've done my best to try and close the gap as much as possible. For example, the laptop's 275HX processor is basically the mobile version of the 285K. Though obviously, like the graphics card, the processor can also use more power than the laptop, which will affect performance. Both also have 32 gigs of DDR5 6400 memory, though the desktop does run its memory at lower timings. As again, that's just another benefit of desktop hardware. The 5070 Ti laptop GPU in the Neo 16 runs at its full 140 watt power limit, which is the best case for a laptop. Technically, the laptop GPU can run as low as 60 watts, so expect even lower performance compared to what I'm showing here in a thinner and lighter laptop with a lower power limit. Laptops just have to have more aggressive power limits because more power equals more heat. And I don't know if you can tell, but there's a pretty big size difference between these two. This means the laptop fans need to spin faster and louder to keep things cool compared to the desktop. Let's have a listen. The desktop, shown in purple here, is running quieter despite the fact that it's using anywhere between 82 and 91% more power at the wall in 3 different games. The laptop GPU in red was running warmer than the desktop, despite the desktop using all that extra power. Again, laptops simply don't have as much space for cooling. The extra power allows the desktop GPU in purple to clock higher in games compared to the laptop version too. The laptop ends up more power efficient from a performance per watt perspective. This is how many frames are generated per watt of power, and although the desktop is reaching significantly higher frame rates than the laptop, it needs more power to pull that off. And we see that big frame rate difference in games like Alan Wake 2, where the desktop was reaching a 50% higher average FPS at 1080p, 59% higher at 1440p, and 69% higher at 4K. Nice. Even the dips in performance on the desktop, as shown by the 1% lows, were higher than the average FPS coming out of the laptop, and it's similar if we enable ray tracing and use DLSS. The laptop is absolutely still playable at 1440p and above 60 FPS. The problem is the desktop GPU with the same name is 55% better. Cyberpunk 2077 wasn't quite usable at 4K ultra settings on the laptop without upscaling, while the desktop was close to 60 FPS, or 62% faster than the laptop. Again, the laptop can run the game well at 1440p, even without upscaling, but the desktop was still 58% faster. With ray tracing on Ultra and DLSS enabled, the gap gets a bit smaller between them at 1440p and 4K, but the laptop is still getting destroyed. It's not all massive gains for the desktop though. Baldur's Gate 3 had some of the smallest differences at 1080p and 1440p, with the desktop just 17% faster than the laptop, as the GPU difference just matters less in this game, at least until we start running things at 4K, where the desktop now has a much larger 63% lead. It's a similar deal in Hogwarts Legacy, where the gap at 1080p was one of the smallest out of all 25 games tested, with the desktop GPU just 16% ahead of the laptop. Honestly, a lot of this difference is likely more due to the extra power the desktop's processor is allowed to use, but once we get to 1440p, the desktop is now 58% ahead of the laptop, and 72% ahead at 4K, the third biggest difference at this resolution out of all games tested. Spiderman 2 had some pretty average differences without ray tracing enabled, where again, the 5070 Ti laptop GPU does offer a good 1440p experience. But I don't think this is a 4K part, and that's especially the case with ray tracing enabled. The 5070 Ti absolutely chokes here, with the desktop version almost reaching a 2.5 times higher frame rate. According to software reporting, it was using 10 to 11 of its 12 gigs of VRAM, so it should still have a bit left. But regardless, performance just drops like a brick on the laptop at 4K with RT on. Alright, you get the idea. Instead of wasting your time individually talking through the rest of the 20 games tested, I'm just going to quickly skip through the rest of the results on screen now. So feel free to pause the video if you want to take a closer look at any specific game. The reason I test so many games is so that we can get a much more accurate average result from a wider selection of titles, which allows us to draw a better conclusion. In other words, more data equals more better. Let's take a look at those average differences next. On average, over all 25 games tested, at 1080p, the RTX 5070 Ti desktop GPU was 39% faster when compared to the RTX 5070 Ti laptop GPU. That's quite a big gap, considering when I compared the desktop 5080s and 5090s, the difference was closer to a 30% lead on the desktop parts. Basically, the performance difference is even bigger between the 5070 Ti parts at 1080p. At 1440p, the desktop card was now 51% faster than the laptop when averaging all 25 games tested. 20 of the games were 50% or more faster on the desktop, which is a huge gap for two products with the same name. Don't get me wrong, the 5070 Ti laptop GPU is very capable of running modern games at this resolution with high settings, even without upscaling. But it's kind of wild that the desktop part has the same name when we're seeing this big of a difference. There's an even bigger 64% lead by the desktop part at 4K. Though, as we saw in many of the games tested, the 5070 Ti laptop GPU doesn't exactly offer what I'd classify as a good playable 4K experience, at least without upscaling. Here's how frame rates look if we instead take the average of all 25 games at all resolutions. I think this better allows us to visually see how much better the desktop is in a quick and easy summary. Again, the laptop was averaging 49 FPS at 4K. Not the best, but some DLSS would make it more usable in most games. So the desktop 5070 Ti was way better compared to the laptop 5070 Ti.
What a big shock.
But what about the price difference? Prices of both will of course change over time, so check those links below the video for updates and to see if there are current sales. Because if we find any good sales on 5070 Ti gaming laptops, we'll add them to the gaminglaptop.deals website. We update that every day to include all of the best sales. So make sure you check it out regularly to save money on your next gaming laptop with that link below. The lowest price on an RTX 5070 Ti gaming laptop at the moment is $1,650 US, though that has a 1080p screen. Most of the better options are anywhere from $2,000 to $2,500, depending on sales. We're looking at around $2,600 US for a similarly spec'd desktop PC to what I've tested in this video, with a lot of that cost coming from the graphics card. I've chosen the cheapest 5070 Ti currently on Newegg, but they're constantly dropping in price. And you could definitely cut back on other parts to bring the total down a few $100s without reducing performance. The desktop is generally better from a cost per frame perspective, but it depends. At 1080p, the cheapest 5070 Ti laptop is about the same value as buying a 5070 Ti desktop for $550 more. But then at 1440p, even a $2,500 desktop provides similar value to the cheapest laptop, despite it costing $850 more, as the performance increase is just that significant from the desktop. At 4K, there's basically no value to be had with a 5070 Ti laptop compared to the desktop. Ultimately, it's going to come down to whether or not you actually need portability. If you do, then good luck taking something like this to school or the office. So if you do need something more portable, then you're probably going to be paying the premium for a gaming laptop. Now, you absolutely can build a much smaller PC than this, but it's still going to be heavy to carry around, not to mention you'll need other accessories like a keyboard, mouse, monitor, some kind of power source, just to match what the laptop has built in. The fact is, laptops are just way more portable, and for some people, that's the priority, even if the performance isn't quite as good as the desktop. Different things for different people with different requirements. Personally, I like the hybrid approach, where I have a pretty decently powerful desktop PC at home, because that's where I spend most of my time using my computer. But then when I go out on a trip like CES and need to do video editing, I can take a mid-range gaming laptop and that would do perfectly fine for me. And if you don't actually need discrete graphics on the go, then you could buy an even cheaper laptop that doesn't have a GPU. It's definitely possible to get the best of both worlds for the amount of money you would spend maxing out either of these. And don't forget, you'll likely get more life out of a desktop because it's just way easier to upgrade than a laptop. In most laptops, you can only change the RAM, SSD, and Wi-Fi, as the CPU and GPU are soldered to the motherboard. So if you want to change those, you've got to replace the whole device. Not exactly efficient, but that's how it is. Meanwhile, with the desktop, in a few generations, I could just pull out this 5070 Ti and put in a 7070 Ti or whatever comes out, and I'm good to go. At the end of the day, both of these 5070 Ti devices can run modern games at high settings, decent resolutions, no problem. It just sucks that Nvidia's using the same name for two things that perform completely differently. But is the 5070 Ti enough, or do you need more power? Check this one out next, where I've done the same comparison but with the 5090. The difference is way bigger than what we've seen with these 5070 Ti's. You want to see misleading? I'll see you in that one next.